I said it the way you say a thing you do not know you are saying, the way you hum a song without choosing to, the way your hand reaches for a railing in the dark before your mind has decided to fall. And I have replayed the half-second before I said it more times than I have replayed anything else in my life, looking for the moment I could have stopped. And there is no such moment, because I did not decide to speak. The words simply walked out of me into a room I believed was empty, and the room was not empty, and that is the whole of how my life divided into before and after. 4 words spoken to no one, overheard by the one person in the palace they could destroy me for hearing. The queen is so beautiful. I was 26 years old, and I was the most invisible person in the floating court of a queen whose people had worshipped her, and her mothers before her, and her mother's mothers back beyond the edge of their own written memory, for longer than humanity had possessed a written language at all. I want you to understand how invisible I was, because the invisibility is not a detail. It is the hinge the whole thing turns on. I was a junior cataloguer in the human archival mission. One of 40 humans permitted into the palace under a treaty I had no part in negotiating and barely understood. And of the 40 I was the lowest, the youngest, the one whose whole work was to sit in a windowless antechamber off the great gallery and translate and reshelve the foreign documents the court had no interest in but had agreed by treaty to preserve. I was a keeper of things nobody wanted kept. I spoke to perhaps 3 people in a given week, and 2 of them were human. I ate alone. I worked alone. I was not important enough to be watched, not important enough to be guarded against, not important enough for anyone in that vast and ancient court to wonder what I might say if I believed no one was listening. And that, the sheer completeness of my unimportance, is the only reason I was ever alone enough to say a careless thing out loud. And it is also, I have come to understand across all the years since, the only reason the saying of it could ever have meant anything at all. A careless true thing said by someone important is a calculation. A careless true thing said by no one to no one is the only kind that can be believed. It was late, the kind of late that the palace only knew in its lowest corridors, because the court itself observed hours of ceremony that did not end so much as exhaust themselves. The great gallery beyond my antechamber had emptied of its courtiers and its sacred functionaries, the long day's liturgy folded away, the lamps banked to the dim amber the palace used for its sleeping hours. And I had come out of my windowless room to stretch my back and to look, the way I did most nights when no one was there to mind a human, looking at the long wall of the gallery where the images of the queen hung. They were not portraits exactly. Her people did not make portraits the way we do, did not try to catch a likeness, a moment, a person in a particular light. They made representations, formal and golden and reverent, the queen rendered as her people needed to see her, which is to say not as a woman but as a kind of living principle, a sacred fact of the universe given just enough shape that it could be knelt to. I had looked at those images 100 times in the dead hours. They were the most beautiful objects in a palace full of beautiful objects, and they were also, in a way I could not have explained then and can only just explain now, the loneliest objects I have ever seen, because there was no person in any of them. There was only the icon, the thing to be revered. The queen as her people had decided she must be, which was, when you looked at it long enough in the amber dark, not anybody at all, a shape where a person should have been, filled in with gold. And on that particular night, tired past the careful guarding of myself that 2 years in that court had taught me, looking up at the golden representation of a being I had glimpsed only twice in 2 whole years, both times from very far away, in procession, veiled, a distant moving brightness surrounded by kneeling. On that night, the woman herself came back into the gallery behind me. I did not hear her. Her people can move without sound when they wish to. It is a thing their bodies can do and ours cannot, a soft-footed silence we have no equivalent for, and she had wished to move that way, because she had slipped away from the closing of the evening rites the way she sometimes slipped away from things, to be, for a few stolen minutes in the amber dark, unattended, unworshipped, unwatched. She had come into her own gallery to be alone, for once, with the absence of herself, to stand before the golden shapes that bore her name and feel, perhaps, the thing I felt looking at them, though neither of us knew yet that the other was feeling it. And she found a human standing before her image in the sleeping hours, and she stopped in the soundless way, and she heard the human say, to no one, to the empty amber air, in a voice gone soft and unguarded with tiredness, and with a truth that had no business at all being spoken aloud in that place. The Queen is so beautiful. I have to tell you what those 4 words meant in that place, because in my own language they mean almost nothing. A pleasantry, a thing said at weddings and in greeting cards, a coin so worn smooth from a billion uses that it has no face left on it, no weight, no danger. You say it and it costs you nothing and means little more. In her language, in her court, among her people, those same 4 words could not be said at all. There was no permitted way to assemble them. It was not that her people did not find her beautiful. That is the thing it took me a long time to understand, and the thing that makes the whole tragedy of it so much sharper than a simple law against praise. They found her beautiful the way you find the dawn beautiful, or a mountain, or a law of nature you have built your life around, with awe, with reverence, with a devotion so total it had its own grammar. But beauty of the human kind, the kind that lives in the eye and the breath and the sudden surprised lift of the chest, the beauty of a person, a face, a body, a someone you might simply be glad to stand near, that beauty could not be attached to the Queen, because the Queen was not a person who could be found beautiful in that way. She was the sacred center, the still point, the fixed thing the entire civilization arranged itself around the way a wheel arranges itself around an axle, and you did not call her beautiful any more than you would call gravity beautiful, or call the turning of the seasons lovely to look at, or tell the law that it had a wonderful face. There were words for revering her, there were thousands of them, an entire liturgy refined across 10,000 years, precise and gorgeous and ancient words for awe and submission and devotion and holy fear, and her people used them constantly, in every interaction, and meant every syllable. But there was no permitted way to say that the Queen was lovely the way a woman is lovely, that her face moved you, that you had looked at her and felt the simple human warmth one feels in the presence of someone beautiful, the small glad lifting that is the most ordinary feeling in the human world and the most ordinary feeling, I came to learn, in nearly every world. Because to say that, to call the Queen beautiful in the human way, was to say that the Queen had a face and a body and a self and a personhood, that there was a her in there behind the gold, that she was a someone rather than a something. And her people had spent 10,000 years making very, very sure that she was not. The icon could not be desired. The icon could not be liked. The icon could not be a person, because a person can be loved and a person can be hurt, and a person can be wrong and a person can die. And you cannot build a civilization still center out of a thing that can be hurt and be wrong and die. So they had hollowed the person out and filled the hollow with gold, generation after generation, and a commoner who spoke of the Queen as though she were a person after all, who reached across the infinite, carefully maintained distance between the worshipper and the worshipped and treated her, for one careless instant, as a someone, had committed a transgression that their law most certainly did have a word for, and the word was not a kind one. And the punishments attached to it were very old and had not been softened by the passing of all that time, because the thing they protected against was, to them, not an insult but an existential danger, a crack in the axle of the world. I knew all of this. That is the thing I most need you to understand, because it would be easier to forgive myself if I had been ignorant, and I was not. I was not a fool, and I was not a tourist. I had spent 2 years in that court, and more than that, I had spent 2 years with my hands literally inside their oldest documents. I had catalogued their legal liturgies myself. I had translated with my own slow, careful work the very statutes that named the transgression and prescribed its answer. I knew that what I had just said aloud was, in their law, a thing that humans had been quietly removed from the palace for in the past, and a thing that, said in the wrong hearing, could end far worse than removal, in ways the old statutes described with a precision that had given me bad dreams during the weeks I spent translating them. I knew it the very instant the words were out of me, knew it the way you know you have stepped off a curb that is not there, the lurch in the stomach that arrives a full second before the fall, the body understanding the disaster before the mind has even named it. And then I heard behind me, very close, in the soundless sleeping gallery, the smallest shift of fabric against fabric, the one sound she had not been able to keep from making, and I understood that the room was not empty, and that there was no safe hearing into which my words could have fallen and dissolved, that the wrong hearing was the only hearing there had ever been, and I turned around. The Queen was standing behind me, unveiled, alone. Close enough that I could have touched her, close enough that I could see, in the amber light, the things the golden images had been built specifically to leave out, the small asymmetries, the faint lines, the particular weariness around the eyes that no representation of her had ever dared to show, all the small, true human-scale facts that together make a face a person's face and not an icon's. And she was looking at me. I have tried for years to describe her face in that moment, and I always fail, because the thing in it was not the thing I had braced for, and the entire story lives in the gap between what I expected and what was actually there. I braced for the cold, serene mask of the icon. I braced for the terrible, composed anger of a sacred thing that has been profaned, the anger that does not shout because it does not need to, the anger that simply lifts one hand and ends you. That is what the statutes had taught me to expect. That is what 10,000 years had built her to be. And what was in her face instead was something I had no preparation for whatsoever, something so far outside what a goddess was permitted to feel that for a moment I genuinely did not understand what I was seeing, because no one had ever warned me, because no one in the history of that court had ever had reason to learn that a hollowed-out icon could look at you the way a starving person looks at bread, the way a person who has been alone past the edge of language looks at the first one in a lifetime to say the thing they had stopped believing they would ever hear. She did not summon the guards. That was the first impossible thing, and I need you to feel how impossible it was, because in the version of the night I had already begun to live through in my terror, the version assembled from the statutes I had translated, the version where I was seized and removed and ended before the lamps came up. This was the precise moment when everything was supposed to happen. A word from her, a gesture, and the soft-footed sacred guards who were always somewhere near would have come, and that would have been the end of the human cataloguer who forgot to guard his mouth. It was the natural law of that place. It was the only thing that had ever happened in such a situation, and it did not happen. She stood there, unveiled in her own gallery in the sleeping hours, and she did not call out, and the silence stretched between us until it was a physical thing, a held breath the size of the room. And into that silence I did the only thing my fear knew how to do, which was to try, frantically, to take it back. I went down onto my knees the way her people did, the full prostration I had watched 1,000 times and never once performed, my forehead toward the floor, and I began to recant, to reframe, to repair, to bury what I had said under the safe ancient liturgy I knew so well from 2 years of cataloging it. I told her, in my careful, catalogued, accented version of her own sacred tongue, that I had spoken in reverence, that I had meant her holiness, her sacredness, the awe owed to the living center of the world. That beautiful had been a clumsy human word reached for entiredness, a poor foreign vessel for what was properly devotion, properly worship, properly the bottomless submission that any creature must feel before the still point of the universe. I reached for every permitted word I knew, and I knew a great many. I had translated them all. I tried, kneeling on the cold floor of her gallery to turn beautiful back into holy, to translate the dangerous thing into the safe thing, to convince her, and through her, the law, the court, the 10,000 years, that what she had overheard was worship after all, and not the forbidden other thing, because worship could not hurt either of us and the other thing could destroy us both. And she listened to me lie. She let me get all the way to the end of it, the whole frantic liturgical recantation, and I knelt there with my face toward the floor and could not see her. And when I finally ran out of safe words and looked up, her face had changed. And the change was the saddest thing I have ever watched happen to another living being. And I have, in the years since, watched a great many sad things. What had gone out of her face was hope. That was the thing I had not understood, kneeling there saving my own life. My recantation was not protecting me from her anger, because there had never been any anger. My recantation was taking back the only gift anyone had given her in the entire span of her existence. She had heard a human say, carelessly, truthfully, not knowing she was anywhere near, which was the only circumstance under which she could possibly have believed it, because anything said to her face was liturgy and anything said for an audience was performance, and only a thing said to an empty room could be true. She had heard a human say that she was beautiful the way a person is beautiful, and for one unguarded instant, in the privacy of her own gallery, she had been a someone, a face. A woman who could move a stranger simply by existing in his line of sight. And now the stranger was on his knees with his forehead to the floor frantically explaining that no, he had not meant that. He had meant only the holiness, the icon, the gravity, the law, the still dead golden center. That he had meant in the end exactly the thing she had been for 10,000 years and was so unspeakably, bottomlessly tired of being. She raised one hand and I stopped talking. And then she asked me something, very quietly, in a register of her language I had never heard a single person use in 2 years of listening to that court. A register with no liturgy in it at all, plain and bare and almost frighteningly simple, the way a language sounds when you strip away everything ceremonial and leave only the part that one person uses to reach another. It was, I would learn much later, the register her people used only in the most private moments of their lives, between a parent and a child, between lovers, between the dying and the ones who sit with them. And it was a register the Queen was never, ever spoken to in, because no one was permitted to be that close to the icon, and which therefore the Queen had heard perhaps a handful of times in her whole life, always from a distance, always belonging to other people. She used it now to me, a kneeling human, and she asked me to say it again. The first thing, the true thing, not the holy version I had just spent my terror constructing, the careless version, the one I had said when I did not know she was there. I knelt on the floor of the gallery and I understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once like cold water, that she was not asking me to confess to a crime so that she could punish it. She was asking me to commit it again, on purpose, to her unveiled face, knowing now exactly who she was and exactly what the words meant and exactly what they could cost. And I understood that this deliberate version was 1,000 times more dangerous than the accident had been, that an accident could be explained away, filed under tiredness, dissolved back into worship, and that she had just refused to let me dissolve it, that she was asking me to make it undeniable. And I understood last and most strangely that she was asking for exactly that danger on purpose, that the danger was the point, because she had had 10,000 years of being a thing that was explained away, 10,000 years of accidents smoothed over and unguarded moments tactfully unseen, and what she wanted, what some buried, hollowed-out, unnamed part of her had perhaps always wanted without knowing the shape of the wanting, was for one person, one time, knowing everything to mean it. I should not have done it. I want to be honest about the calculation, or the absence of one, because the simple version of the story makes me brave and I was not brave, not in the way bravery is usually meant. Every part of my training and my fear and my plain animal sense of self-preservation was screaming at me to keep lying, to stay inside the safe liturgy, to give the goddess her holiness and pray that she would let me crawl back to my windowless room and forget the human ever existed. That was the survivable path. I could see it clearly, even kneeling there. I could have taken it. The recantation was right there, finished in my mouth. But I looked up at her unveiled face with the hope going out of it like a lamp being banked, and I discovered a thing about myself that I had not known and have been quietly grateful for ever since. That there are some cruelties a person will simply not commit, even to save his own life, and that taking the only gift back from the loneliest being in the universe twice in one night was, for me, one of those cruelties. I could not do it. Not because I was brave, because I could not bear to. And so I did the most dangerous thing I have ever done in a life that has not, before or since, asked much danger of me. And it did not feel dangerous at all in the doing. It felt like the simplest and most obvious thing in the world, the way the truth always feels once you stop holding it back. I told her the truth. I rose up off my forehead onto my knees and I looked at her, not at the floor, not at the icon, at the person standing in the amber light with the weariness around her eyes, and I said that she was beautiful. Not holy, beautiful, the human way, a face that moved me, a person I was glad to be standing near, a someone alive in a gallery in the sleeping hours, lovely the way a living thing is lovely and not the way a law is awesome. I said it knowing exactly who she was and exactly what it meant, and exactly what it could cost both of us. And I watched the hope come back into her face, watched it return the way warmth returns to a hand you had thought was lost to the cold, slowly and then all at once. And I understood, kneeling there, that whatever happened to me now, however the night ended, I had done one true thing in a life of careful, invisible nothing, and that it had been worth doing. And that I would not have taken it back, even if she had called the guards in the next breath. She did not call the guards. She looked at me for a long time, in the plain register silence, and then she did a thing that no one had done to her in 10,000 years, and that she did to me as though she were testing whether she was allowed. She sat down. On the floor of her own gallery, unveiled across from a kneeling human, the queen of a civilization that arranged the entire cosmos around her stillness simply folded down onto the floor like a tired person at the end of a long day, so that we were, for the first time in the history of her line at the same height, two someones in the amber dark, and she asked me, still in the plain register, still bare, still simple, to tell her what it had felt like. The being glad, the lifting in the chest. The thing humans feel, she said, that her people apparently did not or were not allowed to or had forgotten. She wanted to know what it was like to look at someone and simply be glad they existed and lovely to look at, with no awe in it and no fear and no kneeling. She had felt the edge of it, hearing my 4 careless words. She wanted to understand the whole of it. And I sat on the floor of the gallery in the sleeping hours and tried to explain to a goddess the most ordinary feeling in the human world. And that was the first of the dead-hour conversations, and the beginning of everything that came after. To understand what I had given her, you have to understand what it is to be the queen, and she could not have told me herself that first night, because she did not yet have the words for it. Those came later, slowly, in the stolen hours we were given, as she learned the plain register the way a person relearns a language they were never allowed to speak as a child. But I have pieced it together since, from 100 dead-hour conversations, and I will tell it as plainly as she came in the end to tell it to me. She had never been a child. That is the foundation of all the rest, and the first thing she ever told me about herself, and she told it without self-pity as a simple fact which made it worse. Her people did not raise their queen, they revealed her. She had been taken from her birth line as an infant, identified by the old signs that the functionaries read in the newborns of certain blood, and removed, and placed at the sacred center, and from her earliest memory she had been a thing that was knelt to. She told me she could not remember ever being held the way you hold a child you love rather than a child you serve, that she had been tended, perfectly, scrupulously, ceremonially, every need anticipated and met by attendants who would have died before meeting her eyes, and that in all of it there had not been one single moment of the thing human children drown in without noticing, the careless, ordinary warmth of being a person someone simply likes to have around. She had been served. She had not been loved, because you do not love an axle. You depend on it, you maintain it, you arrange your wheel around it, but you do not love it. And she had felt the difference her whole life without ever once having the words to name what was missing, because the people who could have given her the words were the same people who had decided she must never have them. She had never been spoken to without liturgy until the night I knelt on her floor. Think about that. Every word said to her, for the entire length of a life longer than humanity's whole recorded history, had been ceremonial, had been addressed to the icon, performed for the icon, shaped by 10,000 years of grammar designed specifically to keep the speaker at the correct infinite distance from the thing they spoke to. No one had ever simply talked to her. No one had asked her how she was and waited, actually waited, for an answer that mattered. No one had told her a small foolish thing just to make her smile. No one had disagreed with her, or teased her, or been bored in her presence, or any of the 10,000 tiny unguarded human transactions that, added up across a life, are what tell a person that they are a person. She had been the most attended being in her civilization and the most profoundly, structurally alone, and she had not known she was lonely, because she had never known anything but the loneliness, and a fish does not know that it is wet, and a person born into the dark does not know that there is such a thing as light until, one night, by accident, someone forgets to keep it from them. She had not rebelled against any of this, and she wanted me to understand that, because the simple version of the story wants her to have been a secret rebel all along, a person straining against her cage, and that is not the truth, and the truth is sadder. You cannot rebel against the only reality you have ever known. You can only ache inside it, in a place so deep you do not even have a language for the ache, and so cannot recognize it as pain, and so call it, if you call it anything, simply being the queen. She had served. She had been the still center. She had let them veil her and revere her and hollow her and fill the hollow with gold. And she had done it not out of weakness, but out of the simple impossibility of imagining anything else, because every other possibility had been carefully, lovingly, totally erased before she was old enough to know it had existed. She had been a good queen by every measure her people had. She had held the center. And she had not known there was anything else to be, until a tired human in an empty gallery, not knowing she was there, looked at her image and said a careless true thing, and a door opened in her that she had not known was a door, had thought was only more wall, more gold, more icon, and through that door came a single unbearable piece of information that rearranged her entire existence in the space of 4 words, that it was possible to be seen as a person. That someone had just done it to her by accident, without meaning to and therefore without lying, and that the seeing had felt to him carelessly, and therefore to her undeniably, not like awe and not like duty and not like holy fear, but like the simple human gladness of being near something lovely. She had spent 10,000 years being worshipped. She had never once in all that time been liked. And the human word beautiful, the faceless worn smooth coin that costs my people nothing, was the first thing anyone had ever said to her that came from liking rather than from awe, and it had very nearly broken her where she stood, kneeling human and standing queen alone in a soundless gallery, because it had told her, all at once and far too late, the exact size and shape of the thing she had been missing her entire life without ever knowing its name. What grew between us after that grew in stolen pieces, in the windowless antechamber and the empty gallery, in the dead hours when the court slept and a queen could slip away from her own sacredness. And I will not pretend it was a romance in the way my people mean the word, because it was at once less than that and so much more. It was, before it was anything else, an education, and I was the unlikeliest teacher in the galaxy, And the thing I was teaching was the single most dangerous subject in her entire world, which was simply how to be a person. It started with small things, and the small things were enormous, the way the first small things always are. She came to the antechamber in the dead hours, unveiled in the plain register, and she asked me about my work, not as the icon receiving a report, but as one person asking another what they did all day. And I answered her plainly, the way I would have answered anyone, the way a human answers a colleague over a shared meal. And I watched her receive the simple experience of being spoken to as an equal for the first time in her life. And I watched it undo her a little and remake her a little each time. I showed her the documents I catalogued. I let her hold them. I do not think anyone had ever let the Queen simply hold something that was not sacred, something ordinary, something she could turn over in her own hands without a liturgy attached. And the first time I handed her a battered human text, and she took it and turned it over and read it, her face did a thing I had no name for, and I realized it was the face of someone doing something so small and so forbidden that the smallness was its own astonishment. I told her about home, about the windowless room and the documents and the long quiet years of being no one in particular. I told her about humanity, about the small foolish things my people do that her people would find absurd or profane or simply incomprehensible, that we name our boats and our vehicles, that we talk to animals that cannot understand us, and to the dead who cannot hear us, that we grieve broken tools and keep useless things for the memories attached to them, that we say the Queen is so beautiful at weddings to women who are not queens at all and never will be. Just because we are happy and they are lovely to us in that moment, and the saying of it is part of the happiness. She could not believe that last one. She made me say it 3 times. The idea that the 4 words that could end my life in her court were, in mine, a thing said lightly, joyfully, to ordinary women, by the dozen at every celebration. It astonished her, and it grieved her, and I watched her hold the 2 facts side by side, the human carelessness and her own 10,000-year prohibition, and try to understand how the same 4 words could be a wedding toast in one world and a capital transgression in another. And I think it was in trying to hold those 2 facts together that she first began, really began, to see the shape of the cage she had been born inside. And one night, in the windowless room in the dead hours, I made her laugh. I do not even remember what I said. It was something foolish, some small human absurdity, a story about myself, a self-deprecation of the kind my people deploy as easily as breathing, and it caught her off guard, under the liturgy, in the bare plain place I had been slowly teaching her to live in, and she laughed. Not the measured, permitted, ceremonial sound her people made in the rare moments mirth was sanctioned. The real thing. The helpless, surprised, undignified, entirely human thing, the sound that escapes a person before they can decide whether to allow it, the sound that is the opposite of an icon. And she clapped a hand over her own mouth in shock at the noise she had made, and stared at me over it with wide, astonished eyes, and I understood, sitting there in the windowless room with the documents stacked around us, that I had just done something more genuinely revolutionary than any human warship had ever done in that entire arm of the galaxy. I had made the Queen laugh, the real laugh, the person's laugh. I do not believe anyone had heard it in 10,000 years. I am not sure she had ever heard it herself. And I understood in the same moment, with a cold that cut straight through the warmth of it, that this laugh would be seen by the people whose entire lives and power and faith depended on the Queen being a thing that did not laugh like a person, as exactly the catastrophe it truly was, and that I was almost certainly going to pay for having caused it. Because the court noticed, of course the court noticed. It was a court, noticing was what it was for. A queen who slips away in the sleeping hours, who returns from the dead hours with something subtly, unaccountably changed in her bearing, a fractional ease in the shoulders, a new quality in the way she held a silence, a warmth that had no liturgical source. This does not go unobserved in a civilization whose entire structure, whose every institution and ritual and certainty, depends absolutely on her being a thing incapable of changing at all. The icon is supposed to be the one fixed point. And the fixed point had begun, very slightly, to move. The sacred functionaries who ran the liturgy, who controlled the veiling and the revealing, the revering and the careful generational hollowing out of every queen for 10,000 years, who had read the old signs in her infant blood and taken her from her birth line and built the gold around the place where a person should have been. These were not fools, and they were not, in their own understanding of themselves, villains. And this is the part of the story that the simple version always gets wrong. And the part I have spent the most years coming to understand. They were not cruel men hoarding power for the pleasure of it. They were the most devoted creatures in the realm, the keepers of the thing they believed with their whole hearts, held their entire civilization together. And they were not entirely wrong to believe it. They genuinely held, and had 10,000 years of unbroken peace as evidence, that the icon was the still axle around which the wheel of their world turned, that a queen who became a person would crack that axle, and that a cracked axle meant the wheel flying apart, meant chaos, civil collapse, the unraveling of an order that had kept uncountable generations of their people fed and sheltered, and at peace with one another. They looked at the small changes in their queen, and they traced them, with the patient competence of an institution that had survived 10,000 years precisely by being good at this, back to their source. They looked at me, the invisible human cataloguer, the lowest of the 40, the keeper of unwanted documents, and they saw correctly with perfect clarity the single most destabilizing force ever to enter their court in its entire history. Not a weapon, not an army, not a fleet. A person of no rank and no importance who had taught their goddess that she was allowed to be one. And from where they stood, guarding with their lives the thing they had given their lives to guard, removing me was not malice. It was sanity. It was duty. It was love, even love of the order, love of the peace, love of the world they were trying to keep from flying apart. And the most frightening enemies a person can ever face are not the cruel ones. They are the ones who are, by every light they have, completely and sincerely right. They moved against me carefully, because I was protected, thinly, but protected by the treaty, and because acting openly against a human carried diplomatic complications the court preferred to avoid. But they were patient, and they were ancient, and they had 10,000 years of practice at making inconvenient things disappear so gently that no one could ever point to the moment of the vanishing, and I began to feel the court closing around me the way the cold closes around a man who has stayed out on the ice too long, not with a blow, but slowly, politely, comfortably, fatally. My access to the upper galleries was quietly narrowed. My catalog work was suddenly subject to review by functionaries who had never cared about it before. The two other humans I sometimes spoke to were, without explanation, reassigned to a different wing. The net drew tight so gradually that for a while I could tell myself I was imagining it, until the afternoon a senior functionary came to my windowless antechamber himself. He was courteous. That was the terrible thing. He was unfailingly, exquisitely courteous, and his courtesy was a blade so fine I did not feel it enter. He admired my work. He spoke in the most beautiful and elaborate liturgical phrasing of the great and central importance of the icon to the peace of the realm, of how the whole vast contentment of his people, the millions upon millions of ordinary lives lived in order and safety, rested upon the perfect stillness of the sacred center. He spoke of the great fragility of holy things, of how a single crack, however small, however well-intentioned, could propagate through a sacred structure until the whole of it failed. And he spoke, with enormous and apparently genuine regret, of the great and sorrowful necessity of protecting such things from contamination. However innocent the contaminant, however much it might not even understand what it was, he did not threaten me. He did not have to, and I think he genuinely did not wish to. I think, in his way, he was warning me, giving me a chance, the way you might warn a man standing in a place he does not know is dangerous. He simply made certain, in the gentlest possible language, that I understood three things: that I was the contamination, that the realm protects itself from contamination as surely and as impersonally as a body protects itself from infection, and that the treaty I imagined was my shield would not be permitted to protect me one finger's width further than the protection of the icon allowed. Then he thanked me for my service, and admired my work once more, and withdrew, soundless, and left me alone in my windowless room with the perfect clarity of a man who has just been shown, very politely, the exact shape and dimensions of his own grave. And in that clarity I finally faced the thing I had been refusing to face since the night I knelt on the gallery floor: that the gift I had given her, the seeing, the personhood, the plain register, the real laugh in the windowless room, was a gift that was going to cost one of us everything, and that the only questions left were which one of us it would be, and how much, and whether I had the courage to make sure it was me. The crisis, when it came, did not come as violence, and I have always thought that was the cruelest design of all, because violence at least lets you fight, lets you be brave in a way the body understands. It came instead as a choice the queen was forced to make in front of her entire assembled court, and she made it, and the making of it is the thing her people still argue about in their schooling halls and their temples, the single afternoon in which 10,000 years of certainty cracked straight down the middle. The functionaries, unable to remove me cleanly and quietly without the queen's own sanction, for I was, in the end, attached to her now in a way the whole court half suspected, and to vanish me without her word risked provoking the very thing they feared, did the one thing that could bind her completely. They brought the matter before her formally, in open court, in full liturgy, before the assembled sacred apparatus of the realm, and they framed it so that she could not escape it without revealing exactly what they suspected. They charged me, the human cataloguer, with the old transgression speaking of the queen as a person, profaning the icon, the very statute I had once translated with my own hands, and they laid the matter, with perfect ceremonial correctness, before the icon herself, and they asked her, the queen, the sacred center, to confirm the charge and pronounce the ancient sentence upon me. It was a perfect trap, and I understood it the moment I was brought into the gallery and made to kneel beneath the golden images. They had built her a door with no room behind it. If she confirmed the charge, she protected the icon and ended the dangerous human in one stroke, and demonstrated to the whole court that the still center still held, that nothing had changed, that the gold was intact. And if she refused, if she would not confirm that calling her beautiful was a transgression, then she admitted, in open court, before the entire weight of the sacred order, that the icon was a person who could be seen as beautiful, which was the precise contamination they were trying to burn out of her, confessed by her own mouth in the most public possible way. They had given their goddess a choice between her loneliness and her world. Confirm the charge, and lose forever the one person who had ever seen her, and keep the cage and the gold and the 10,000-year peace. Refuse it, and save the human, and crack the still center of her entire civilization in public, with consequences not even they could predict, and they had spent 10,000 years specifically preventing. And they were certain, they had every reason in all their long history to be certain, that any queen would choose the world, because every queen before her always had, in ways large and small, every single time, because the hollowing out had never once failed to hold. They were not gambling. They were collecting on 10,000 years of evidence. I knelt in the great gallery, beneath the golden representations that left out everything true about her, to hear the charge read and the sentence pronounced. I did not look for mercy. I had catalogued their law. I knew precisely what the sentence was, and I had made my peace with it in the windowless room the afternoon the functionary admired my work. So I did not look at the functionaries, and I did not look at the gold. I looked at her, unveiled upon the sacred center, surrounded on every side by the entire gorgeous apparatus of her own erasure, the liturgy and the kneeling and the gold all arranged to remind her, and every one of exactly what she was supposed to be. And I tried, with my eyes alone, across the infinite permitted distance that I was not allowed to close, to tell her that it was all right, that the gift had been worth it, that she should choose the world and let me go, that I would 1,000 times rather be ended having once said the true thing to her face than survive a long gray life having never said it at all. I meant it with my whole self kneeling there, and I tried to give it to her as my last gift, the permission to choose the world, the absolution, the freedom to let me be the one who paid, the way she had once given me on the floor of that same gallery, the chance to be true. I was ready. That is the one thing in a life of careful smallness that I am without reservation proud of. I knelt there entirely ready to die so that she would not have to crack, and I tried to make my eyes say so, and I believe she understood me because I saw her understand and I saw her refuse. She looked at me, across the gallery, across the 10,000 years, and she did not take the gift I was offering her. She did the other thing, the thing no queen in the whole length of her line had ever done. The thing that was not forbidden by any statute for the simple reason that the entire liturgy had been constructed, across 10,000 years, to make it unthinkable, and the unthinkable does not need to be forbidden. She rose. She rose from the sacred center, unveiled in open court, before the assembled gods and functionaries and kneeling multitude, and she spoke, not in liturgy, not in the high sacred tongue of the icon, but in the plain register, the bare simple person-to-person register that I had taught her in the dead hours, and that no one in that gallery had ever once heard pass the lips of their queen. And the sound of it alone, before she had said anything at all, struck the court silent with a kind of horror. Because the register itself was a confession, the register itself said there is a person standing here. And then she said the words. She said that the charge was false, because it was not and had never been a transgression to call her beautiful. And then she said the thing that cracked the center, the thing the functionaries had spent 10,000 years, and the entire golden weight of their civilization to ensure no queen would ever say. And she said it plainly, simply, in her own person, looking the whole time at me and not at them. She said that she was a person, that she had always been a person, that the icon was a thing they had built around her and called by her name, and that she had let them build it all her life, because she had not known there was anything else she was permitted to be, until a human had told her the truth by accident in an empty gallery in the sleeping hours, and she had heard it and could not unhear it. She said that she would rather be a person and risk the world than be a still dead golden center for one more single day of a life she had only just, far too late, come to understand was a life and not a function. She did not pardon me the way a queen pardons a subject, from above, across the distance. She defended me the way a person defends the one who first saw them, down at my level, in the plain register, looking me in the eyes. And in the doing of it she set down 10,000 years of being the thing they needed her to be, set it down in public, in front of everyone, gently and without apology, and she became, before her horrified guardians and her astonished kneeling people, the single most dangerous thing her civilization had ever produced in all its long history, which was, in the end, simply and only herself. I would like to tell you that the world ended, because that is precisely what the functionaries had promised sincerely, with all their devotion, and it is what 10,000 years of unbroken certainty insisted must happen the instant the still center cracked. It did not end. That is the quiet revolutionary fact at the very bottom of this whole account, and it is the thing her people are still, all these years later, slowly and painfully, and not without grief learning how to live inside. The center cracked, and the civilization did not fly apart, and it took everyone, the functionaries most of all, a long time to understand why. And the why is the most important thing I learned in my whole life in that court. The thing that had actually held their civilization together had never been the hollowness of the icon at all. It had never been the gold, or the stillness, or the careful erasure of the person. It had been her, the person they had hollowed out and buried under the gold, the someone who had been holding the center all along from inside the cage, unthanked and unseen and unnamed, doing the real work of being the heart of a people while everyone knelt to the shell built around her. And a person, it turns out, can hold a civilization together at least as well as an icon can, and very probably better, because a person can grow and answer and choose, and love the people she serves rather than merely existing as the fixed point they orbit. And she can do all of it while laughing in the dead hours, while being seen, while being beautiful in the human way, and not only awesome in the old one. The functionaries had been entirely right that the icon would crack. They had been wrong, catastrophically and gloriously wrong, about what they would find underneath it, because in 10,000 years not one of them had ever once looked, because looking was the precise thing their entire sacred order existed to forbid, and so they had never learned the one fact that would have eased all their fear, that there had been a real queen in there the whole time, and that she was enough, and more than enough, and had only ever been waiting to be let out. It was not a fairy tale, and I have to be honest about that, because the simple version of the story desperately wants it to end with the human and the queen, the two of us, together under one roof in the way my people mean it. And that is not how it ended, and the truth of how it ended is so much better that I would not trade it. She was still the queen. A queen who had become a person was, if anything, more bound to her people than the icon had ever been, not less, because now she served them as herself, with her whole real self, and a person who serves her people as herself does not get to lay the burden down and run away with a junior human cataloguer, however true the thing he once said to her in the dark. We both knew it. I think we had always known it, even in the windowless room, even in the dead hours when it would have been easiest to pretend otherwise. What we had was never going to become the thing my people mean by romance, the thing that resolves into a shared life and a closed door, and to have wanted that, to have asked her to choose me over the people she had just, at such impossible cost, finally become able to truly serve, would have been to want her to be smaller than the self she had just fought the whole weight of her world to claim. I loved her too well to want her smaller. That too, I learned in that court, that the truest form of love is sometimes the one that refuses to make the beloved less in order to keep them close. But what we had was real, and it was enough, and it was, I believe this with my whole heart, all these years later, more than most people in any world ever get. I stayed in the court. The treaty was renegotiated under terms I will not bore you with. The charge against me was formally dissolved. The functionaries, those who could bear to live in the cracked new world, remained and slowly, grudgingly, began the long unfinished work of learning to serve a person instead of worshiping a thing, and those who could not bear it withdrew into silence or exile, and the realm did not fall, and the great slow transformation of a whole civilization began and is still going on, and may very well not finish in my lifetime or hers. And I became, quietly, without title, without ceremony, without any office that appears in any record, the one person in the entire realm permitted to speak to the queen plainly, the keeper of the plain register, the human she had first been seen by, the one allowed past the liturgy and the gold, into the bare simple place where she was only herself. It is the sole office I have ever held, and I have held it for the whole of the rest of my life, and I would not trade it for any throne in the galaxy, human or otherwise. And on the quiet evenings in the dead hours, when the court sleeps and the weight of being a person who holds a whole civilization together becomes, for a few stolen minutes, too heavy even for her to carry alone, she comes to the gallery, unveiled, and she finds me there waiting beneath the golden images, which no longer look anything like her, because the living woman turned out to be so immeasurably more than the icon ever was that the old representations seem now like portraits of a stranger. A flat gold ghost of a person who was always there and never shown. And she lets the whole vast apparatus of her sacredness fall away from her shoulders like a heavy coat at the end of a long day. And for those few minutes she is only herself, a someone, a face, A person with weariness around her eyes who carried 10,000 years entirely alone before a careless, exhausted human happened to tell her the truth. And I tell her, every single time without fail, the true thing, the human thing, the thing that cracked her world and saved her life and is now, by her own decree, the law of all the realm rather than a transgression against it. I tell her that she is beautiful. And she lets me. And it is the only unguarded moment in the whole of her long, long reign, and it costs her nothing now, and it is everything. And I understood years and years ago that I would spend the entire rest of my life saying 4 careless words to the one person in the universe they were always, somehow, against all the odds of 2 species and 10,000 years, meant for, and that I had said them first by accident, to an empty room that was not empty. On a night I was simply too tired to guard my own mouth, and that the worst mistake of my life turned out to be the only thing I ever did that truly mattered, and the truest, and the one I would do again without a half-second of hesitation if I had it all to live over. She told me her name once in the dead hours, after the world had not ended and the long transformation was well begun. Her people do not give the queen a name. The icon does not need one. A name is a person's possession, and the queen was not permitted to be a person. And so, for 10,000 years, the sacred center had been nameless, called only by her title, addressed only by liturgy. But she had become a person now, at last, in front of everyone, and a person has a name. And so somewhere in the silence of the gallery in the sleeping hours she gave me hers. The one syllable that no one in 10,000 years had ever been allowed to speak to her. The most private and forbidden and intimate word in the entire realm. The word that did not appear in any liturgy because the icon was not supposed to have one. She gave it to me because I was the one who had seen her first, and because a name is the thing you give, in the end, to the one who sees you. I will not write it here. It is the single thing in this entire account that I will keep not out of secrecy, but out of the same instinct that made her keep it her whole life without knowing she possessed it. The instinct that a name is not a thing to be catalogued and shelved and preserved, that some words are meant to be spoken aloud, in a quiet gallery in the dead hours, by one person to another and nowhere else. But I will tell you this much, because she told me it meant something, and the meaning is the truest ending I have. In her oldest tongue, the tongue from before the liturgy, before the gold, before the hollowing out, her name means the part of the eye that lets in the light, the seeing part, the dark center that opens to let the whole world come in. And I have thought, every quiet evening since she told me, that her people named that long-buried line of golden imprisoned queens with a terrible, accidental, 10,000-year honesty, that in the most sacred and secret word they possessed, the one word they forbade anyone ever to say aloud, they called each hollowed-out queen by the name of the very thing they had spent all those millennia forbidding her to do. To see and to be seen. I said she was beautiful to an empty room, on a night I was too tired to be careful. The room was not empty. And neither, after 10,000 years of gold and silence and kneeling, was she and the part of her that had been waiting, all that time in the dark behind the icon, was the part that opens to let the light in, and it had simply been waiting, the whole while, for someone careless enough, and tired enough and human enough to forget to keep the light away.